So it's fitting that I'm standing here in the side yard of our house, because this is where I first filmed when the quarantine kicked into effect. And this feels like a transition weekend to me. You know, we're going to be gathering again next week in micro expressions of church. We're starting a new series, a new study. We're gonna see what the Bible has to say about the topic of endurance, which is pretty timely. And today we're wrapping up our study of the Psalms. And I just want to thank Robert. He did a great job taking big ideas that scholars talk about and really making them accessible and showing how they really help us in reading the Psalms and in praying and connecting with God in the different seasons of the soul that we go through. Well, today I want to start with a question. If someone were to ask you, if I'm asking you, what do you think about when you think about this global pandemic and the quarantine? You know, the things you might begin to, that come to mind that you might begin to talk about are like, well, the way it's impacted you, you know, some of the losses maybe that you've experienced. Maybe you talk about how it's been handled, you know, if you feel like it's been handled well or not so well. But would you begin talking about all that God has done? How thankful you are for this and how it's been something God has used in your life to change you. That's the idea that I keep thinking about. You know, anytime there's adversity or difficulty or suffering that produces pain or discomfort of any sort, it becomes a wonderful opportunity to experience the deeper hand of God, the deeper involvement of God changing us. If you had problems before, it's only going to magnify them, you know, a marriage, parenting, financial, physical, emotional. This whole situation has exacerbated some of the difficulties, and that becomes a blessing. And you might be like, what the heck? What do you mean a blessing? It's a blessing because it's exposing some things that God wants to extract from our life because they're dragging us down. There's a poem I came across by Sarah Bournes. It's called Exposed. Let me read just a portion of it. She writes, "We've all been exposed, not necessarily to the virus, though maybe, who knows. We've all been exposed by the virus. Corona is exposing us, exposing our weak sides, exposing our dark sides, exposing what normally lies far beneath the surface of our souls, hidden by the invisible masks we wear, now exposed by the paper masks we can't hide far enough behind. Corona is exposing our addiction to comfort, our obsession with control, our compulsion to hoard, our protection of self. Corona is peeling back our layers, tearing down our walls, revealing our illusions, leveling our best laid plans. Corona is exposing the gods we worship, our health, our hurry, our sense of security, our favorite lies, our secret lusts, our misplaced trust. Corona is calling everything into question. What is the church without a building? What is my worth without an income? How do we plan without certainty? How do we love despite risk? Corona is exposing me, my mindless numbing, my endless scrolling, my careless words, my fragile nerves. We've all been exposed, our junk laid bare, our fears made known, the Band-Aid torn, the masquerade done. So now, what's left? And I'll pause there just because I feel like this is an opportunity for us, for God to continue the transformation. I think of this experience like almost like a spiritual exile. In the Bible, when God's people, the Israelites, were captive by enemy nations and deported to other lands, it was a time of purging more than it was punishing. A spiritual winter kills off pests and parasites and things that are going to ruin an abundant harvest. They force roots to go deeper. I think about this almost like a cocoon, or at least I hope so, that, you know, the metamorphosis process, a caterpillar crawls up and spins the chrysalis and then comes out 2 weeks later after its body completely decomposing and something called imaginal discs recreating, it comes out a butterfly. And Julie said to me the other day, a couple weeks ago actually, she said, I don't want you to come out of this with like half a wing, you know, like let's really take this opportunity and not rush out of it, but to really like suck the marrow out of what God wants to do in us during this time. And that's my concern, that we might be so quick to transition, that we might miss the best part. You know, Jesus served the best wine at the end of the wedding. Even if you could say right now, like, here's all the great things God's done in my life, maybe the best is yet to come. Let's lean in, let's listen. For me, this has been a really powerful time of transformation. I started strong, I thought. Things got busier at the beginning, and I had planned a spiritual retreat, and as it got closer, and the plans had been canceled, I knew I needed to get away. And I just wasn't handling things well, and I wasn't tending to my soul and drawing near to the Lord. I was just working harder, and that's really been a problem for me my whole life. So I threw my camping gear in the car and headed to Tennessee with intentions to come back in a couple days. I set up camp on an island that I had paddled to on a big lake. And this is probably a story for another day, but I felt like I heard the Lord say, I didn't go far enough. So I paddled back, packed up, and drove farther away and came back 2 weeks later. And for me, it was a really powerful time of digging into some of the roots of my brokenness. Why am I so driven? Not just trying to manage that, but like why? And it really came down to a faulty view of God. And so I appreciate the difficulty and how it exposed that. And I studied Saul and David in the Bible, these two kings from Israel's past, the first two kings of Israel, and they were very different. They both had God's blessing at a point. They both had things going for them, and yet Saul was the guy who just followed his instincts and followed his gut and tried to make the best decision right there in the moment. David, however, was more prone to seek God, to listen to God, to draw near to God, to wait on God. And so that's what I realized. Man, I've been a Saul leader my whole life, or much of it, and I want to be more like David. Like, I don't want to feel that pressure to figure it out. Like, I really want to lean in and listen to God. And so I could talk forever about some of the changes and things that He's done in my life. And I just want to encourage you to be thinking about what God might be doing in your life. I made a little list here of some of the things that He might be trying to call to our attention, or expose, or challenge, or change in us individually or collectively, you know, just as His people. He might be deepening our desire for His presence by taking away the things that we've been superficially trusting in. And so He's stripping away all these other goals so that our singular goal is Him, just Him, relationship with Him. Maybe He's emptying us of ourselves, breaking us of our false impressions of being in control so that we can really trust Him. He's detaching us maybe from our love of the world and our attachment to superficial things that can't satisfy and they won't save us. He might be creating a new hunger for relationships as He intended. Biblical fellowship, it's called, this spiritual community being knit together with others in the process of being changed by God. In the larger sense, for the church as a whole, you know, it's possible He's shifting us from a consumer Christianity to deeper spiritual formation. He might be weaning us off our dependency of programmatic fellowship to get us back to the biblical roots of what the Bible word is, koinonia. He's helping us pivot from a weekend service focus to integrating faith and relationship and walking with Him into all the other 167 hours of every week. No, I don't think He's done. I think God is doing good things in our lives, and we don't want to miss it by rushing out of this season. As we've been studying the Psalms, Robert has showed us about Psalms of orientation, disorientation, and reorientation, and how they help us connect with God in the different seasons of the soul. And it's not like the Psalms of disorientation aren't just a little trick that we can pull from up our sleeve to all of a sudden feel happy. The point of them is to be near to God, to draw near to God, not just to be happy. Psalms of orientation are there so that when things are going well and we're so prone to forget God and just enjoy His gifts, They're there to give us words to stay closely connected to Him and to not feel guilty and ashamed. That I hear people talking about that, like I feel bad that my job hasn't been affected and financially we're doing fine, and I know it's hard for other people. Times of blessing are times, the Psalms tell us, to praise and acknowledge God, and we shouldn't do that with shame. Obviously, we may be blessed to be a blessing. Those Psalms of reorientation help us not just all of a sudden feel the relief and the weight off our shoulders and to just revel in that, but to actually see the source, to know that God was the one who did it. So we've got these Psalms. They help us process. 2/3 of them are laments, which is important, right? Because there's a legitimacy to lament, and I think it's a reflection of our humanness. We see it in Jesus. Paul talks about it, weep with those who weep. James talks about that, like even the conviction we have when God exposes things in us to weep and wail and mourn because of things. So that's what laments are for. They help us express that stuff inside, and this is kind of maybe not the best analogy, but it's a little gross, but like spiritual vomiting, to take all that yuck that we're feeling inside and to get it out to God. And the problem is, a lot of us, what we do with those feelings is we suppress them and we shove them down, and we think either it's bad or wrong to feel them. Don't disdain your feelings. Maybe you grew up in a family that's like, suck it up, or made you feel bad, or, make you wuss, quit crying. Like, don't reject that stuff. These are gifts from God, and they are meant to be tethered. This is important. To take whatever feelings you have and stick a bridle in their mouths and a saddle on their backs and grab those reins and use those feelings to drive you to God, into His presence. And what I want to do to sort of wrap this study of the Psalms up is I've collected a set of scriptures about the presence of God, because I really think that's what it all comes back to, guys. Is God enough for you? Do you yearn and long for His presence? That's what He's doing. That's what He's calling us to in this time. And what's interesting is each type of psalm, orientation, disorientation, and reorientation, all have this constant theme of the presence of God. He's called a rock and a refuge and a shelter and a rest and a protection. And I want to read this Psalm 84. It says, "How lovely is your dwelling place, O Lord of heaven's armies. I long, yes, I faint with longing to enter the courts of the Lord. With my whole being, body, and soul, I will shout joyfully to the living God. Even the sparrow finds a home, and the swallow builds her nest and raises her young at a place near your altar, O Lord of heaven's armies, my King and my God. What joy for those who can live in your house, always singing your praises. A single day in your courts is better than 1,000 anywhere else. I would rather be a gatekeeper in the house of my God than live the good life in the homes of the wicked." I don't know if you can hear the birds, but as these birds have been chirping, what this is saying that bird, where it wants to build its nest, is at a place of refuge and safety and protection and life and provision near the altar. It's such a great picture for us, because we know that Jesus, because of His sacrifice, being the end of all sacrifices, we are able to be cleansed and forgiven, and God's presence actually comes to live within us. And so there's a longing in us to experience that. That's a psalm of orientation, somebody who's got things going well, saying, man, that's all I want. I just want to be in your presence, praising you forever. Another psalm here, a disorientation psalm. "O God, you are my God." This is Psalm 63. "O God, you are my God. I earnestly search for you. My soul thirsts for you. My whole body longs for you in this parched and weary land where there is no water. I have seen you in your sanctuary and gazed upon your power and glory. Your unfailing love is better than life itself. You satisfy me more than the richest feast." So here's somebody who feels like they're just dying. They're just parched and they're famished. And they're saying, I have a spiritual hunger for your presence. It's a feast, and I want it even more than I want water, even more than I need food. Here's another one. It's a reorientation psalm. It's Psalm 16, 8-11. I know the Lord is always with me. I will not be shaken, for he is right beside me. No wonder my heart is glad, and I rejoice. My body rests in safety, for you will not leave my soul among the dead, or allow your Holy One to rot in the grave. You will show me the way of life, granting me the joy of your presence and the pleasures of living with you forever. He's saying that in this life, while we are still in this earthly body, that our deep desire is the joy that comes from his presence. And when this body is spent and done, and we hang this body like a bathrobe up on the back of the door, when that time comes, then we get to experience, he says, the pleasures of living with you forever. This final psalm is Psalm 93, verses 12-14. But the godly will flourish like palm trees and grow strong like the cedars of Lebanon, for they are transplanted to the Lord's own house. They flourish in the courts of our God. Even in old age, they will still produce fruit. They will remain vital and green. I love that image of these trees that have been transplanted where? Into the presence of God. And you know what's there in the presence of God? Vitality and nourishment. No matter how old you may be, there will be a harvest of fruitfulness in your life. And man, as I look at these Psalms and I think about this constant theme about the presence of God, and I think about all that's been exposed in our lives and what God's doing, I just know it all comes back to that question, is he enough? Like, is God enough? And he's calling us to desire him more than anything else. I think God has more for us. I think he's doing some great things, and I want to leave you with a couple questions today. When everything is going great, are you going to walk with God in joyful praise, or are you just going to enjoy his gifts? He's calling you to enjoy his presence. Question number 2, when it's all falling apart, is it enough to have the Lord and not just use him as a means to an end to being happy? Is it enough to have the Lord even in your brokenness? Third question, when he rescues you, will you recognize his hand, or will you mistakenly just revel in the result of his work in your heart and life? All these stages we go through, all these emotions we feel, they're all there as gifts to bring us back to life itself, to bring us back to God, so that we can say, as the Apostle Paul said, when he was languishing in a prison with enemies spitting venom at him, he was able to say, I have learned the secret of being content in all circumstances. I can do everything through Jesus Christ who strengthens me, because to live is Christ and to die is gain. This whole series on the Psalms culminates in this moment to say, do you know Jesus Christ? Do you have a relationship with him because of his work, what he's done for you on the cross? If you do, then you can come to him and you can enjoy his presence, and you can seek him and know him even in whatever season you may find yourself in. If you're new to LifeSpring, we want to help you have a relationship with God, and so you can follow up by clicking the Connect card, and we'll follow up and talk with you about how you can do that. If you know the Lord, let him be enough. Let him satisfy you, and let your eyes focus not just on what is, but what will be, what is to come.